I used to think life had a way of giving people exactly what they deserved. That's what I told myself when I woke up each morning, staring at the ceiling of my single apartment in Port Harcourt. My name is Stella Dawson, and for a long time, my life felt like a waiting room. I was waiting for love. Waiting for approval. Waiting for something I couldn't name but believed would make me whole. I was 40 and unmarried, and for as long as I could remember, society had been whispering, no, shouting, that my life was incomplete. Family gatherings were the worst. It had become a silent battlefield. Aunts and cousins would smile politely before cutting to the chase. So, Stella, when will we see grandchildren? Is there any nice man in your life yet? I forced smiles, nodded, and muttered something vague. But inside, it felt like a punch to the stomach every single time. Each question about marriage is a dart to my chest. You're too choosy, one aunt would say. You need to humble yourself, another would add. I learned to smile through it all, pretending not to care. But inside, the pressure was slowly weighing me down. For years, I resisted. I told myself marriage wasn't a race. I told myself I had my career, my faith, my peace. Yet the pressure never stopped. Cousins got married, friends started families, and the world seemed to move on without me. Living in a quiet compound in Port Harcourt, surrounded by people who measured a woman's worth by the ring on her finger comes with its own frustration. My neighbors were mostly young couples, newlyweds with noisy children and constant visitors. Every Sunday morning, would watch them drive out together, wives with matching headscarves, husbands holding little hands. Then I'd lock my door, sit on my couch, and whisper, maybe next year will be mine. At 40, I had long stopped expecting surprises. I lived alone in a modest one-bedroom flat in Rumuodara, a peaceful area filled with the smell of freshly fried fish and the constant hum of generator sounds at night. I had a good job with an oil servicing company and a steady routine that kept me busy enough not to think too deeply about what I didn't have. But still, there were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering if life had somehow passed me by. My compound wasn't anything fancy, 4 flats, a narrow corridor, and a large guava tree that shaded our small parking space. The tenants were friendly enough. There was Mama Peace, the retired nurse who always smelled of menthol balm. And Mr. Ben, a talkative teacher who never missed an opportunity to tell you about his political opinions. Then there was the new tenant who moved into the flat opposite mine, Godswill Hart. I remember the day he arrived vividly. It was a humid Saturday afternoon. I was outside washing my clothes when a moving truck stopped by the gate. Godswill stepped out, tall, calm-looking, wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans. He greeted everyone politely, introduced himself, and got to work helping the loaders arrange his furniture. Later that evening, he came over with a small smile. Good evening, Ma. I'm sorry about the noise earlier. I just moved in. I laughed softly. No problem. You're welcome. I'm Miss Stella. He nodded. Nice to meet you, Miss Stella. From that day, we became neighbors in the truest sense of the word. He was one of those people whose presence calmed an environment. If you were carrying something heavy, he would rush to help. If the tap wasn't running, he would fix it. Sometimes, we would meet outside in the evenings and talk about work, Port Harcourt traffic, and life in general. It wasn't romantic, at least not for me. I saw him as a kind man with a good heart. But something about the way he listened when I spoke. The way he remembered little details about my day. He was a quiet man with kind eyes and an easy smile. We became friends naturally, the kind of friendship that doesn't need effort. He'd greet me every morning, help carry my groceries, and sometimes leave little notes of encouragement on my doorstep. You're stronger than you think. God hasn't forgotten you. I didn't read too much into it. I saw him as a good friend, nothing more. Desperation didn't let me give our friendship the chance to develop into something deep. Back then, my mind was consumed by something else, marriage. Everywhere I turned, someone was reminding me that my time was almost up. My cousins, my colleagues, even my church group. They meant well, but their pity felt like poison. Then one Monday morning, everything changed. My office sent a circular. Some staff were to be transferred to new branches around Port Harcourt. My name was on that list. God's will be done, I said quietly to myself. It was far from where I lived, and after weeks of traffic and exhaustion, I decided to move closer to my new workplace. I remember the evening I told God's will I was leaving. He stood beside me moody while I packed my last box into the car. His voice was calm, and his eyes. They said something I didn't recognize then. Will you at least call sometimes? He asked, forcing a small smile. Of course, I said. It's just a new apartment, not another planet. He chuckled. Still, people move and vanish. Don't vanish, Stella. I didn't vanish intentionally. Life just happened faster than I expected. Between settling into my new office, finding a new church, and meeting new people, our calls became fewer until they stopped. There was no fight, no goodbye, just silence. My new compound was noisier, filled with young families, children's laughter, and the constant sound of quarrels over water, parking, or light bills. It wasn't as peaceful as my old compound, but I told myself I could adjust. After all, life rarely gives you everything you want at once. I tried to keep to myself at first, but in a compound like that, privacy was almost impossible. Everyone knew everyone's business. The woman who lived next door, Sandra, was particularly loud. She was in her early 30s, married to a man who worked offshore. Every time he returned, she made sure the whole compound noticed. New clothes, loud laughter, expensive perfume, everything about her screamed I'm married and happy. At first, I admired her energy. But soon, I began to sense something else beneath her smile, a kind of pride that stung whenever she looked at me. "Ah, Miss Stella, you're always so neat," she said one Saturday morning as she spread clothes on the line beside mine. "But you know, Anne, this your beauty will just waste if you don't marry. Time is going. Oh, look at me, my husband just bought me an iPhone." I smiled politely. "Congratulations. I'm happy for you." She laughed. "Don't worry, your time will come. Just don't be too picky again. Any good man is better than no man." Her words lingered longer than they should have. I tried to brush them off, but that night, as I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, I felt the old ache in my chest. Any good man is better than no man. It wasn't just Sandra. My mother called more often now, her tone heavy with worry. "Stella, my daughter, you're not getting younger. What are you still waiting for? You have a good job, you're beautiful, responsible. Are you saying there's no man?" "I'm fine, Mama," I would say, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "Marriage will happen when it's time." But every call left me feeling like a failure. At work, things weren't much better. Two of my colleagues, both younger than me, got engaged within the same month. One afternoon, during lunch, one of them joked, "Auntie Stella, you better hurry, we will soon be calling you our senior bachelor." I laughed along, but the laughter felt hollow. That night, I cried quietly. Not because I didn't believe in God's timing, but because the waiting had become too heavy. Everywhere I turned, someone reminded me of what I didn't have, then, as if fate had been listening to my silent cries. I met Duncan. It was at a friend's small get-together, a casual evening hangout at a lounge in GRA. Duncan was tall, charming, and confident. He said all the right things, smiled at the right times, and seemed genuinely interested in me. We exchanged numbers, and he began calling every day. He was attentive, funny, and made me feel like the most important woman in the world. It was refreshing. After so many lonely nights, someone finally wanted me. A month later, Duncan proposed. There was no formal courtship, no deep conversations about values or goals. I didn't know his family that well. I didn't even pray about it or ask that we pray together and seek the face of God. All I knew was that he said he loved me, and for the first time in years, I felt seen, chosen, desired. The wedding was small but elegant. My mother danced with tears in her eyes, singing praises that her daughter had finally become a woman. Sandra, my neighbor, was among the first to congratulate me, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite define. "You see? I told you it would happen," she said. "Marriage changes everything." It did change everything, but not the way I hoped. The first month after the wedding was sweet. Duncan was caring, generous, and proud to show me off. He took me to restaurants, called me my queen, and told everyone how lucky he was. I told myself it was finally my turn to be happy, but I was wrong. As the days go by, the mask began to slip. If I could turn back time, I would have slowed down. I would have listened to the uneasy feeling that whispered inside me the day Duncan proposed. But I was too tired of waiting, too desperate to prove a point, to my family, to my neighbors, and maybe even to myself. It started with little things. He would go out and return late without explanation. At first, I made excuses for him. When he came home late, I told myself it was work. When he flirted openly, I called it harmless. When he yelled, I said he was just stressed. But the truth? Duncan never hid who he was. I was the one pretending not to see. Our home became a house of arguments, slammed doors, and silent nights. He spent most of his evenings at lounges, coming home with the smell of alcohol and perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked questions, he'd hiss, "Stella, don't start. You're lucky I married you. A 40-year-old woman should be grateful." That sentence became his favorite weapon. "You're lucky I married you." It echoed in my head until I began to believe it. "You should be grateful I married you." Those words pierced me deeper than he realized. I tried to ignore them. I cooked his favorite meals, prayed for peace, and smiled in public. But behind closed doors, the man I called husband became someone I couldn't recognize. He had a temper, one that grew sharper with each passing week. If food was not ready on time, he shouted. If I spoke too softly, he accused me of disrespect. Once, he threw a plate that missed my head by inches. "I'm sorry," he said the next morning. "It's just stress. Work is tough." I believed him, until the day I found a lipstick stain on his shirt. When I confronted him, he laughed. "You're just paranoid, Stella. Don't forget I did you a favor marrying you. Many men wouldn't touch a woman your age." That night, I cried until my pillow was wet. The words echoed in my mind, "I did you a favor." It became the anthem of my pain. Months passed, and things got worse. The insults became frequent. The beatings less apologetic. He started disappearing for days. My calls went unanswered. When he returned, he smelled of cheap perfume and alcohol. I stopped asking questions. I tried to fix things. I prayed. I fasted. I met pastors who told me to endure. He will change. But Duncan didn't change, he got worse. He became colder, crueler, more distant. The first miscarriage happened 6 months into the marriage. He wasn't home that night. I had been feeling sharp pains and called him, but he didn't answer. I dragged myself to the hospital alone, crying quietly as the nurse said, "Sorry ma, it's gone." When I told him, he shrugged. "You worry too much. Maybe it's not yet time." No hug. No comfort. Just a man flipping TV channels like nothing happened. The second miscarriage broke me. The doctors said it was stress. But how do you remove stress when you live with the source of it? The third almost killed me. That one came after he hit me during an argument, hard enough to make me crash into a table. I woke up in the hospital with tubes in my arm and no baby inside me. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, thinking, this can't be what love is supposed to feel like. I begged God for strength, but even my prayers began to feel empty. My body was weak, my spirit tired, and my heart numb. Yet, for reasons I can't fully explain, I stayed. Maybe it was fear of starting over. Maybe it was a shame, or maybe I had finally accepted the lie that this was all I deserved. Then one evening, after another heated argument, he raised his hand again, but this time, something inside me snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, looking at him like I was seeing him for the first time. He yelled, insulted me, threw things around, but I felt nothing. It was like my heart had turned to stone. When he finally stormed out, I walked into the bedroom. picked up my small travel bag, and began to pack. There were no tears this time, only silence. When I was packing my things, Duncan came back, but he didn't stop me. He only watched from the balcony and said coldly, "Don't say I didn't warn you. No man will want you now." Maybe he was right. Maybe no man would. But I knew one thing for sure: I would rather be alone than live another day in hell. Finally, I left his house. I didn't pack much. Just my clothes, my Bible, and the pieces of my dignity. My mother came with a few of my cousins to help. As I locked the door behind me, I whispered a prayer: "God, please, if I ever find love again, let it not come with pain. God, if you still love me, please, help me start again." That night, I slept for the first time in months, really slept, without fear of footsteps, shouting, or fists. In the morning, my mother made breakfast and said quietly, "Stella, my daughter, you have to choose life. Not fear, not shame, life." Her words sank deep, and so I began again. Slowly. Broken, but breathing. When I left Duncan's house, I thought my life was over. At 44, divorced, childless, and jobless, I felt like a shadow of the woman I once was. I couldn't even return to my old office because I had resigned after marriage. Duncan insisted I quit, saying, "My wife can't be running around with men in that company." Foolishly, I agreed. Now I sat in my mother's small sitting room, staring at nothing, wondering how to start all over again. The first few weeks were the hardest. I would wake up in the middle of the night sweating from nightmares, Duncan's voice, his anger, his laughter. I could still hear him saying, "No man will want you now." But somehow, deep down, a quiet strength began to grow inside me. Maybe it was God's mercy, or maybe it was the prayers of my mother who never gave up on me. One morning, I looked in the mirror and said to myself, "Stella, you're still here. You survived." That was where healing began. I started attending a small women's fellowship near my mother's church in Remulla. At first, I sat quietly at the back, not wanting anyone to notice me. But one evening, the leader called me out and said, "Sister Stella, God says you're not a failure. He preserved you for a reason." I broke down in tears. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not for my mistakes, but for my survival. Slowly, I began to pick myself up. I used my savings to start a small catering business. Cooking had always been something I enjoyed, and with time, people began to order from me: weddings, birthdays, church events. Business was slow but steady. I found joy in the little things: laughter with customers, worship songs on the radio, evening walks with my mother. As months passed, I became active in church. I joined the hospitality department, organized programs for women, and found comfort in serving others. The pain was still there, buried deep, but it no longer controlled me. One Saturday afternoon, I went to Genesis Mall in GRA to deliver food for an event. I was walking out with a tray of pastries when someone called my name: "Stella." "Stella Dawson?" I turned. For a moment, I couldn't believe my eyes. Standing in front of me was God's Will Hart, my old neighbor from Remuodara. He looked older, sharper, more confident. But that same warm smile was still there. "God's will?" I whispered, surprised. He laughed. "I can't believe this. After all these years." It turned out he had traveled out for a professional course shortly after I left our old compound. We sat in a cafe near the mall, talking like old friends. He didn't ask about marriage or my past. He only said, "You look stronger than I remember." I smiled faintly. "I've been through a lot." He nodded. "Then I thank God you're still standing." As he spoke, I felt something inside me stir, a mix of gratitude and fear. Gratitude that someone from my past still saw me as more than my scars. Fear because I didn't want to open my heart again. Not after all I had survived. Before we parted, he said, "I'll like to see you again, Stella. If that's okay." I hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his calm voice, his eyes, the same ones that once looked across the compound at me years ago. Was this God's way of giving me another chance? Or just life reminding me of what I once lost? I didn't have the answer yet. But for the first time in a long while, my heart didn't feel heavy. And maybe healing was not just about forgetting the pain, maybe it was about learning to live again. If someone had told me that love could come knocking again, I would have laughed at them. Love? After everything I'd been through? No, I had buried that word the day I left Duncan's house, but God's will came back into my life like a soft breeze, not the kind that forces doors open, but the kind that gently lifts the curtains and lets light in. After that meeting at Genesis Mall, he started checking on me. A short call in the evening, "Stella, have you eaten?" A message on Sunday morning, "Don't forget church today." Sometimes he'd stop by my shop to buy snacks he didn't need, just so we could talk. At first, I tried to keep my distance. I didn't want to owe anyone my peace of mind again. But the more I tried to push him away, the more he showed me a different kind of care, one that didn't demand, didn't manipulate, didn't control. One afternoon, he came to my stall under the hot Port Harcourt sun, started helping me arrange coolers for an event. When I told him he didn't have to, he smiled and said, "Stella, it's not every man that wants something from you. Some of us just want to see you smile." That sentence. It disarmed me, because it had been so long since someone wanted to see me happy, not perfect, not obedient, just happy. Weeks turned into months, and our friendship deepened. "I didn't think I could feel peace again," he said one evening while we sat outside his car, listening to the city hum around us. "But talking to you feels easy." I didn't reply. My heart was torn between the woman I was becoming and the one who still trembled whenever she remembered Duncan's voice. At night, I would kneel beside my bed and pray, "Lord, don't let me make another mistake. Don't let me fall for a lie again." But each time I saw God's will, peace followed him, the quiet kind that sits in your chest and whispers, "You're safe now." Still, I tested him, not intentionally, but out of fear. Sometimes I'd cancel plans at the last minute. Other times, I'd ignore his calls. But he never raised his voice, never accused me of anything. He'd only say, "I'll be here when you're ready." And he always was. One rainy evening, I slipped and almost fell while carrying food trays to a customer's car. He ran toward me, grabbed my hand, and steadied me. Our eyes met for a brief second, and in that moment, I saw what I had been missing for years: gentleness. It scared me more than anything else. Later that night, I found myself crying again, not out of pain this time, but confusion. Because for the first time since I left my marriage, my heart wanted to believe again, maybe not in perfect love, but in the kind that grows slowly, patiently, like a seed after a storm, and maybe, just maybe, God's will was the rain I didn't know I needed. My mother always said, "Stella, it's not every man that smiles that has peace in his heart." So even when my heart began to soften toward God's will, her words sat somewhere deep in me like a warning bell. After all, I had been deceived once, by Duncan's smooth tongue and fake promises. I couldn't afford to walk into another storm while thinking it was sunshine. Still, I couldn't deny it. God's will had become part of my everyday life. We talked every day, prayed together over the phone, and sometimes met for lunch near my business place in GRA. He was deliberate, never rushed me, never made me feel like I was in debt to his kindness. One Sunday after service, my pastor preached about healing and letting go of fear. He said, "Fear of being hurt can make you reject the blessing God prepared for you." Those words struck me so hard that I couldn't stop thinking about them all day. Later that evening, God's will called. He said softly, "Stella, I know you're scared. I can see it in your eyes. But let's not rush anything. Let's just walk with God and see where He leads." That night, I lay awake replaying His words. Walk with God and see where He leads. Maybe that was what I needed to do all along. Not fight for love. Not beg for love. Just walk with God and let Him guide me. But as peace was slowly finding me, trouble came knocking again, in the form of a woman. Her name was Tonia. One afternoon, she walked into my shop looking all polished and angry. She didn't even buy anything. She looked me in the eye and said, "Stay away from God's will." At first, I laughed because I thought it was some kind of joke, but she wasn't smiling. she went on to say she had been dating him, that I was a distraction, and that she wouldn't sit back and watch him be snatched. Her voice carried bitterness that only a wounded lover could know. I was shaken. I didn't even know he had anyone in his life before. When God's will came that evening, I didn't even greet him properly. I confronted him straight. "Who is Tonia?" He looked surprised, then sighed deeply and explained. She was his ex, the woman he once planned to marry until he found out she was cheating. She had refused to accept the breakup and had been causing him trouble ever since. He told me, "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to bring drama into your healing. But I should have. I'm sorry." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But a small part of me, the part that still bore Duncan's scars, whispered. What if he's lying too? That night, I couldn't sleep. I prayed and cried again. I didn't want to lose peace. I didn't want to go back to confusion. By morning, I decided to pull back a bit. I stopped picking his calls for a few days. I needed to breathe, to hear from God clearly. Then one day, he sent a text, "Stella, I understand your silence. I won't disturb your peace. But just know this, I won't let fear steal what God is trying to build. I'll wait. One step at a time." That message broke something in me, not in a painful way, but in a healing one. Someone wasn't forcing me, and maybe, just maybe, this time, love was doing it right. They say the devil doesn't always come with horns. Sometimes he wears a familiar face and says, "I've changed." It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when I saw Duncan again. I was arranging my shop when a black SUV pulled up outside. The moment he stepped out, my heart skipped. It was him, my ex-husband. He looked different, calmer. Or maybe just better dressed. I stood there frozen as he walked toward me with that same confident smile that once melted my heart. "Stella," he said softly, "you look beautiful." I wanted to reply with anger. I wanted to remind him how he once called me useless, but the words refused to come out. He continued, "I came to apologize. For everything. I was foolish, blind, and ungrateful. Please, give me a chance to make things right." I didn't say a word. I just kept looking at him, the same man who made me question my worth, who raised his voice and sometimes his hand. He brought out a gift bag filled with perfume, jewelry, and a new iPhone. "You deserve more than I gave you," he said. I smiled weakly, not because I was moved, but because I realized how small those things looked compared to the peace I now had. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed. It was God's will. "Hey, how are you?" he asked. I could tell he sensed something. "I'm fine," I lied. He was silent for a few seconds. Then said, "You've been quiet lately. Please don't shut me out. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Tears filled my eyes. I wanted to tell him Duncan was back, but I didn't want to cause panic. So I said goodnight and prayed instead. The next morning, Duncan showed up again, this time at my gate. He said wants us to talk about reconciliation. He was begging and crying, but you could see pretense in him. When I told him that I have forgiven him but can't go back to him, he angrily walked out and slammed our door. My mother came to me later that night, her voice serious. "Stella, what do you want to do?" I told her. "Mummy, I've forgiven him, but I can't go back. That chapter is closed." There was silence before she said, "If that's your final decision, then I stand with you." The following Sunday in church, I saw God's will sitting alone. I sat beside him, and when he turned, I saw a question in his eyes. I whispered, "He came back." He looked down for a long moment, then said quietly, "I was afraid this would happen. But I won't compete with your past, Stella. I just hope you don't let it destroy your future." That hit me deep. A few days later, my uncles gathered and officially returned Duncan's bride price. Since we never did a court marriage, it was simple. I felt free, truly free. That evening, I met God's will at a cafe. He didn't ask questions, he didn't lecture me. He just smiled and said, "Now you're truly ready for the next chapter of your life." And for the first time in years, I felt peace, quiet, genuine peace. Peace, that was what my soul had longed for, and finally, I had it. I thought the story had ended with me learning to stand on my own again. But God was only preparing me for something new. It started one evening after midweek service. Our pastor, a humble man who barely knew much about my personal life, called me aside. He looked at me and said, "Sister Stella, I don't know what you're going through, but in my prayers last night, God showed me something. There is a man, someone patient, kind, and gentle, whom God has prepared for you. You almost missed him because you were in a hurry before." I froze. My heart started beating fast. I didn't tell him about God's will, yet I knew instantly who the message was about. That night, I went home and wept. Not from fear, but from gratitude. It was as if God himself was rewriting my story. The next day, I told my mummy that my pastor said something strange yesterday. She listened quietly as I narrated everything. When I was done, she chuckled lightly and said, "That's God confirming what I've been praying about. Stella, I've seen the way that young man looks at you. Don't push him away." I was silent. Then she added, "My daughter, not every man comes twice. Be still, and let God finish what he started." Later that week, my best friend, Joyce, who didn't even know about my conversation with my pastor or my mum, came to visit me. We were sipping Zobo in my shop when she suddenly said, "You know, Stella, every time I see you and God's will together, there's something peaceful about the both of you. I feel like he's your real husband, the one God meant for you." I was speechless. I felt chills all over my skin. How could three people who knew nothing about each other say the same thing? That evening, God's will came by with dinner packs and soft drinks. He'd been doing that lately, sometimes bringing small surprises just to see me smile. I tried to act normal, but something in me had changed. "Stella," he said softly, "I don't want to rush you. I know you've been through enough, but I just want you to know, I'm here. No pressure, no demands. Just let me love you at your pace." I looked at him and saw sincerity in his eyes. Not pity. Not desperation. Just calm, unshakable love. A few weeks later, during a special Sunday service, I couldn't hold back anymore. I knelt at the altar, tears flowing freely as I whispered, "Lord, I'm ready. If this is truly you, take control." That same day, God's will came to my house. He wasn't dramatic, he just smiled and said, "You've been in my prayers for years. I asked God to give me the right time, and now, I believe the time is here." I didn't say a word. I just nodded, tears in my eyes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of love. This time, I felt peace, the kind that only comes from God. Sometimes, I look back and wonder, if I hadn't gone through the storm, would I have recognized peace when I found it? Weeks passed after that Sunday revelation, and something in me shifted completely. God's will and I grew closer, but this time, it was different. There were no lies, no pretense, no fear of being judged. Just two people who had both been broken before and were now ready to love the right way. One Friday evening, he called me and said he wanted us to meet at a new restaurant along Peter Adelai Road in Port Harcourt. I didn't think much of it. We'd been meeting there for quiet dinners lately. When I got there, the soft jazz music, dim lights, and neatly arranged flowers gave the evening a special glow. He stood up as I walked in, smiling like he'd been waiting all his life. "Wow, Stella," he said with that calm, deep voice of his, "you always make my day brighter." We talked, laughed, and shared stories. For the first time in years, I caught myself genuinely laughing, not the polite laugh of someone trying to appear fine, but the real, belly-deep kind that comes from joy. Then, just as I was sipping my drink, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Stella," he began softly, "I've loved you quietly for years, you know, from the very first day we met. Back in then, I admired you. You were different. Strong, kind, peaceful. I used to sit outside, pretending to read my newspaper. Just to see you pass by. I never had the courage to tell you how I felt then. I thought you were too focused, too graceful to notice a man like me. Even when life took us apart, I never stopped praying for you. You don't know how many nights I prayed to see you again. When I finally did, years later, I told myself I wouldn't lose you this time. My heart skipped. He continued, I knew God was giving me another chance. I don't take that lightly. You are strong, graceful, and everything I prayed for. I know you've been hurt, but I promise you, I'll spend my life proving that love can be gentle too. Then he stood, brought out a small velvet box, and went down on one knee. Stella Dawson, he said, smiling nervously, will you marry me? The whole restaurant went quiet. Some people had already pulled out their phones, recording. Tears rolled down my cheeks before I could even speak. I nodded, then I whispered through trembling lips, yes. Yes, I will. Yes. Yes, I will. Applause erupted around us. A few strangers even shouted, God bless this union. When he stood and held me close, I felt peace, not the kind that comes from calm weather, but the kind that comes when a storm has finally passed. When I got home that night, I fell on my knees and cried like a child, not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood what it meant to be loved the right way, not tears of sorrow, but of healing. God had indeed restored what I thought I had lost forever. Over the following weeks, we began our marriage counseling at church. Our pastor smiled when he saw us together and said, this is what happens when God writes your story, everything aligns in his time. Planning our wedding felt peaceful. There was no rush, no drama, no need to impress anyone. It was simply about gratitude and new beginnings. The day I tried on my wedding dress, Joyce burst into tears and hugged me tightly. You see? She said. God doesn't forget. He was just preparing you for this moment. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw not just a bride, but a woman who had been broken, rebuilt, and redeemed. This time, it wasn't desperation. It was destiny. The morning of my wedding, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. There was peace in my eyes, the kind that only comes after walking through fire and realizing God was in the flames with you all along. As Joyce adjusted my veil, she whispered, see you now, Mrs. God's will. We both laughed, and I felt my heart swell with gratitude. The church was filled with soft music and white roses. I saw faces of people who once pitied me now smiling in awe. My mother sat at the front row, tears of joy streaming down her face. As I walked down the aisle, my heart whispered Psalm 126 verse 5, they that sow in tears shall reap in joy. And truly, I have sown in tears. But this day, I was reaping joy, pure, undeserved joy. When I reached the altar, God's will's eyes met mine. There was no fear, no doubt, just certainty, the quiet assurance that this was where I was meant to be. Our vows were simple but sacred. I, God's will, take you, Stella, to be my wife, to honor you, to cherish you, and to love you as Christ loves the church. Tears slipped down my face as I repeated mine. I, Stella, take you, God's will, to be my husband, to respect you, to stand beside you, and to love you with a heart healed by God. When the pastor declared, you may now kiss your bride, it felt like heaven itself applauded. That evening, at our reception, I gave a short speech. I held the microphone with trembling hands and said, if anyone had told me that I'd stand here today, I wouldn't have believed it. But Isaiah 61 verse 3 says God gives beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, and praise for heaviness, and today, I am living proof. The hall went quiet, and tears filled more than a few eyes. From that day, my life became a testimony. I didn't just become a wife, I became a voice for women who had been broken and lost hope. Months later, I was invited to speak at a women's conference. I stood before hundreds of women and shared my story. Not to boast, but to remind them that no pain is wasted when God is involved. I told them, marriage is not a competition or a rescue plan. It's a covenant. Wait for the right one. Don't let pressure push you into a mistake. Romans 8 verse 28, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. I saw hope flicker back into many eyes that day. Today, I run a small foundation, the Waiting Grace Initiative, where we counsel single women, victims of abuse, and couples on the edge of divorce. I tell them what I've learned, don't die in silence. Don't let society define your worth. Marriage is a blessing, not a burden. Speak up, seek help, and above all, trust God's timing. Sometimes, during our evening prayers at home, I look at God's will across the room, reading his Bible or teasing me with that same calm smile, and my heart whispers Psalm 118 verse 23, "This is the Lord's doing, it is marvelous in our eyes." And indeed, it is. From pain to peace, from rejection to restoration, from tears to testimony. My name is Stella Dawson, now Mrs. Stella God's Will, and my story is proof that when God writes your love story, it ends in peace.